Hi everybody, POWER8 guy here, really known as Sean Bodley. I'm a historical high availability and disaster recovery specialist on IBM Power Systems. That's kind of my history and my forte for those of you that don't know me. But I go by POWER8 guy on Twitter and on YouTube, and recently I was retweeting some charts that I've seen Phil Dunn tweet out, and I actually like them quite a lot. That's why I retweet them. First and foremost, you also need to know about me is I'm a technical guy. I'm a pre-sale solution design, and I'm do a lot of services work. Though at times I feel like the Maytag repairman because I go implement a IBM Power system with POWER8 and as long as it's even remotely reasonably maintained, I rarely have to go back. So I guess that's a good problem to have, but I digress. So recently retweeting these charts, I've made statements about some of the performance numbers and how much I like them because I don't really know why the competition would share the charts that truly aren't in their favor. Now, I said I'm not a sales guy, I'm not a marketing guy, but I am a numbers guy. I didn't have to minor in math in college, but I really do like numbers. So on one of the comments I made, you can see on this chart that I got this reply back from Phil. Now let me say this: I don't know Phil. Phil doesn't know me. I'm just a peon. I'm a nobody. Like I said, I just like numbers. So I just wanted to explain how I got what I got, and there's nothing magical going on here. You'll also see by the time I'm done here that everybody makes numbers look the way they want them to look, as far as they only show the things they want you to see, right? The sales and marketing is all really good about doing a little bit of magic. So not necessarily lying as much as having you focus on what they want you to see. And I'm fully aware of that, and I'm okay with that. And I also don't want there to be any misunderstanding that I have any hard feelings towards Phil or our competition or any other competition, whether it's storage, application, whatever. I will also preface this by saying I am not an application guy. Half of these benchmark names don't mean squat to me. Prior to seeing these charts, I don't know what an eJOP is. I don't know that many people do. I also know that each company will show the benchmarks that they want people to see. So I'll talk about that a little bit too. But like I said, I'm not sales. I'm a technical guy. This is not to be combative. This is purely informational. And I'll probably say this more than once during this presentation, is don't ever believe one single source for information only. Don't just take my word for this. Don't just take Phil's word for anything he says. Don't take any HP, Intel, Lenovo, EMC, whatever rep for their word. It's just the nature of the business. I always encourage you to do your research on your own, and while I fully expect that this is not completely a reasonable request to make, I strongly encourage anytime you are looking for a new solution, even if it's replacing an existing one, don't believe everything that all of us say. Benchmark it. Go to each vendor and get your benchmark done. And prove it. Don't just take the word for it, prove it. There's nothing wrong with that. We also know that, between sales and negotiations, things that we see on paper for list price and stuff is never the case. And I will also say this, in part of my previous life, I was on a sister team that assisted doing benchmarks in the past. And we never, ever lost a benchmark purely on performance only. We had mid 90% win rate, And usually the only times we lost is that when there just wasn't any money to be made on the deal. The competition undercut the price so much to keep their footprint or get their footprint in the door. Historically, IBM doesn't work that way. So if there's not a single dollar to be made, usually it's easy to walk away from. So on this chart that Phil sent me, there's only two parts of these that even mention Power 8 or show Power 8, and I think that's part of his point too, is that, hey, where's the benchmark on the other options here? I don't know where they are. I mean, I guess I could go Google and search and see if they're there. I have no reason to believe that anything on this chart is not true and accurate. I believe it to be. I don't believe that Phil or anybody else in his position would pass around bad material purposely. So I'm not going to say I've done the homework to prove that everything on here is correct. But what I have done is simply done the math on a couple of these areas. So let me talk about this, or show this here. So here's the two areas that there is a Power 8 824, which by the way is a entry level server, which makes the story even more compelling. But not to focus on that too much, is look at the numbers here. Okay, so you see here it says total users 50,000 compared to 40,000. Okay, well that's already higher than what the Oracle is showing. So why would they show that number? Well, if I can, that's a good question really, and I'll think I can address that in just a minute. So if I look at this, I say, gee, I got 50,000 users. I'm only using 48 cores. 48 cores gives me a little bit over 1,000 users per core. Whereas with the T5 number here, 40,000 users on 64 cores only gives me 625 users per core. Plain and simple. So that is a compelling story in its own, but let's take it a little bit further. Is that part of the reason why this chart is shown is the focus on the last column being users per CPU. Well, here's the other part of the puzzle. The Power 8 CPU, this one that was in this benchmark, was a 4-core CPU. The one that was used for the Oracle was a 16-core CPU. But the short of it is, it still equates to more cores. So I like the claim of the 2 times faster per CPU than Power 8, because here's what's important. That absolutely positively is a completely true statement. This system, SPARC T5-2, with 64 cores, and it's not even so much the 64 total as much as it's 16 cores per CPU. So, if the amount of users per CPU is only 2.4 times greater, SPARC over Power 8, that doesn't add up. That is where the 2 times faster per CPU number comes in. That's why the statement in parentheses is completely true. So I said it didn't add up, but here's why it doesn't add up. Is look at the last line. I'm comparing 16 cores to 4 cores. So shouldn't that 2.4 at least be 4? That would make it even. So we need it to be more than 4 for it to be a compelling story. So I'll explain why this matters, and I think anybody that even has a clue knows why the per core is important. I think also part of the statement here is why the comment is saying CPU to CPU. I mean, if I've got a V16 Formula 1 race car, but it only produces a little bit more power and work than my V6 twin turbo, I guess in this case it'd actually be a V4 twin turbo. It's not very compelling to continue to put money into that large V16 engine. So here's another way to break down some of these numbers, is that The Power8 was 48 cores, the SPARC was 64. So with 3/4 the number of cores, the Power8 824 entry-level system still achieved 1.25 better performance. That's overall. That's not core per core. That's system per system. So 48 cores, Power8 to 64 core SPARC shows 1.25 the performance based on the total users. When I actually spec out the per core numbers, it comes out to be 1.6 times users per core. So there's nothing funny going on here. This is all numbers that have been provided conveniently to me. I didn't even have to go look this up. All I did was take advantage of the numbers that are here. So the second part of that chart was this middleware thing. Now again, I told you I don't know what SpecJ Enterprise is or an EJOP-S is. All I know is that it's a spec benchmark that's being used to show that, hey, look, Oracle is the greatest in the middleware performance. I assume this has specific applications. I don't know if it's Oracle versus DB2 or if it's actually Oracle versus Oracle. I personally like benchmarks where the entire stack of solution is the same. If it was an all Oracle solution other than the hardware, if it was compared to IBM Power, Oracle on IBM Power, to me that's a more apples to apples comparison, but I don't know exactly how these are done. But what I wanted to focus on was two parts of this chart, which I think first and foremost everybody likes to say, hey, I'm number one. I don't blame you. I would too. And I'm not too sure I wouldn't use this chart the same way that it's being represented if I was on the other side. Because if I look at this, it clearly shows that this T5-8 has 57,000 EJOPs, and the entry-level Power8 only has 22,000. That's very easy to see. Oh gee, well it's about 2.5 times more system to system. That's the key. But if I break this out further, well, look at the number of cores. It used 128 cores compared to only 24 on the Power8. So simply the ratio of cores, 128 to 24, is a factor of 5.3. Now this tells me that to be a compelling argument, the number of EJOPs should be 5.3 times more than what it is on the Power8. And as you can see, that clearly is not the case. It has 5.3 times the cores to only get 2.5 times the numbers. So when we break this out further, you take the total number and divide it by the number of cores. It gives you how many EJOPs per core. So for the SPARC T5, it's 448.61, and for the Power8, it's 939. That is over double per core. But if you look, there's nothing on this chart that's telling you that the Power8 is better than the SPARC. I'm showing you other numbers that says this is why it's better. That's why they continue to show the last column of whatever the spec benchmark value is compared to the CPU and not the core. So in this case, there is 27% more per CPU. 27% more EJOPs per CPU SPARC over the Power8. Now, having said that, it takes, I still have to remember, I've got 16 cores per CPU, and in this case it's only 6 Power8 cores per CPU. So you've got to compare 16 cores to 6 cores. That is equal to 167% more cores. Not the total. The total is a factor of 2.67. But your baseline being 6, it's going to have to take 167 more cores to achieve 27% more performance. Now, we all know that the more cores you put on a chip, it doesn't necessarily, the performance isn't directly 100% increments linear. Now, they can be close. Power historically has been real close. Power 8 is very close in the grand scheme of things. SPARC is not that far behind, but it's not as good as the Power, and then Intel is one of the worst as far as linear performance increase based on shoving more cores on a chip for a multitude of reasons, because it's the overall architecture. It's not just the chip, it's a little bit of everything. So okay, so I mentioned going number 8 to number 1, but if I look at this chart and I go back and focus on the EJOPs per CPU again, if I look at the last one on the list, number 10, it actually has the highest number. So to me, that seems like the more logical choice to compete against. Take the one that has the highest number per CPU. So it happens to be the 32 core SPARC T-5 here. So when I start off here with, this is a continuation of the number from the IBM Power 8. The blue is Power 8. The pink numbers are Oracle, for no other reason than this chart had them in pink to begin with, so I thought it was an easy way to keep them separated. So when you take this number of 17,033 and divide it by the 32 cores, it's only 532.3 EJOPs per core. Again, the Power 8 is at 939. So that's not quite 2 to 1, but it is 1.76 times greater. So you can, this is a good example of, even though there's more cores and more chips on the one that's ranked number 1, the math, doesn't hold true as far as you're not going to get 8,500 for every set of 32 that you add. And again, that's not unique, a unique problem to SPARC per se. It's just some designs are better at getting closer to that linear scalability than others. So what I think is an important piece to this chart that's missing is how things relate per core. So I went on and did the math on all of these. I know I was only focusing on number 1 and number 10 because those were closer to the two highest numbers that weren't Power 8. And you can see there the Power 8 number of 939. I did round these accordingly. If it was over a half, I rounded up. If it was below a half, I rounded down. So, one thing that we run into is rperf. I know IBM likes to show rperf. I don't know why others don't, but I guess it's still just a sales and marketing thing. It's to show your pieces of the puzzle that look the best, and historically IBM likes their rperf numbers. So here's some rperf numbers on the Power 8 scalability of how they relate when you have SMT turned on. And I do know that SPARC has 8-way simultaneous multi-threading as well. Fortunately, reading Phil's tweets, I even saw him clearly state that out of those 8 threads, you can use 2 simultaneously. I'm not really sure what the purpose of having 8 is if you can use 2 simultaneously, but with Power 8, you can use all 8 simultaneously. So, why does all this matter? Why is it focused on number of operations per CPU? And if you're really so proud of your CPU performance numbers, why is the Oracle licensing for SPARC have a factor of a half when their licensing on Power is 1 whole? So to me, that's, if it's supposed to be an apples to apples comparison, to me they should either both be a half or they should both be 1. But that's called how you level the playing field. You have to change something on one side to, I need roughly 2 SPARC cores, uh, give or take. In some cases it's more, some cases it's a little bit less, of 2 cores to equate the same amount of work on the power. So that's just, it's good sales and marketing. It really helps create a better number for the initial acquisition cost and hopefully the cost of ownership. So with that being said, like I said, I shared this stuff because I do like numbers. With some of my retweets of some of these slides from Phil recently, people were asking about, how do you explain or justify that number, and then I retweeted or tweeted back to Phil that I do like to use his charts because we don't have to redo much work. We can use their own stuff and show the difference. So, like I said, this is nothing more than to be informational, not combative. I am a tech and a services guy. I am not a sales guy, but I like to have engaging conversations. I believe that I'm realistic. I'm down to earth. I'm not set in my ways. I can be persuaded at times. There are things that I like that IBM has. There's things I like that non-IBM competitors have as well, and I'm usually quite frank in sharing those one way or the other, because I like to think at the end of the day, no matter what we're doing, we all have the same focus, which is do the right thing. And if it's piecemeal these things together with different vendors, apps, hardware, so be it. Because I know if I was a customer, that's how I would want to be treated. I don't necessarily need an entire stack solution from one vendor, even though there is normal a comfort level from support of doing so. I understand that. So otherwise, that's it. I just wanted to put this together, and of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments below.